Hello and welcome to the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference Podcast. My name is John Scanlon of the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference. Today we meet Garry Coles. Garry will be speaking in Dublin in April of 2024. And Garry is one of the leading experts in the world on hypno-oncology, the topic in which he will be discussing in Dublin. In this episode, Garry talks about his journey and how he got to that point, medical research, and the difficulties that he faced in conducting those research pieces. How cancer rates were on the rise, how social functioning affects cancer patients, and how his training has led him all around the world. And finally, what I think is a beautiful definition of hypnosis, he describes how he arrives at it, imagining things differently. I hope you enjoy the episode, and if you would like to come to the conference, tickets are available, as well as all the details at www.irishhypnotherapyconference.ie. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome. It's John Scanlon of the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference Podcast, and today we are talking to Garry Coles. Garry will be presenting in Dublin in April. He will be presenting on hypno-oncology, and I am going to let Garry introduce himself. How are you, Garry?
I'm very good. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inviting me over to Dublin. It's been a long time since I've been over there, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you and me both. Because as we were talking just beforehand, I mean, cancer is something that affects everybody. Not everybody, but it's been on the rise. It's affected most families. And of course, hypno-oncology will be very of interest to an awful lot of people. So, but do you want to just give your background, just so people get a sense of who Garry Coles is?
Yeah, okay, we'll do that. And yeah, you mentioned about hypno-oncology and sort of cancer being on the rise. The statistics are quite frightening on that front, because people don't realize that because we're living longer, more people are going to be prone to it sort of later in their life. There may be other things, chemicals, food stuffs and things like that that could have an impact on it, but that's a completely different conversation. But statistically in the Western world, they're now saying that people born since 1960, 1 in 2 will actually experience cancer at some time in their life. I mean, it's something like 1 in 7 women will get breast cancer, 1 in 15 men will get prostate cancer. It's quite a frightening statistics when you look at it.
When you put them that way, and there's hardly a family that hasn't been touched by it. I mean, I was saying to you, I've lost 3 people closely through cancer. So and I mean, in Ireland, I suppose that it's changed to, 30, 40 years ago when you mentioned that word, it was a death sentence basically. It's a little better today.
It is, and yeah, you are right. It was everybody sort of said, "Oh, the C word,"
Yeah.
and that's it, and it was a death sentence. Now, particularly if it's caught early enough, the survival rate is pretty good. Obviously, it does vary from cancer to cancer,
Mm.
but the survival rate is pretty good. Although it still has that same sort of effect on a lot of people. A lot of people still have that old-fashioned mentality about the C word. And one of the big areas that we need to address for people that are going through the cancer journey is actually social functioning. Because a lot of people, as soon as they hear that somebody's got cancer, people clam up and don't want to talk to them, not because they don't want to be friendly anymore, but they're frightened of upsetting them, or doing something wrong. So they tend to avoid them. And it does shut down a lot of their social area, which is something that I found that doing research. Which is now an area that they're saying that sort of given coping strategies and things is a useful way for people to go through the cancer journey. And one of the things that's needed there is social interaction. The person's not changed. They're going through a cancer journey. When the patients I work with, I mean, one of the things that I say to people is laughter. It's great.
Yeah.
Have a laugh with them. If somebody's got a dark sense of humor, then do that. Just because they've got cancer, it hasn't changed their sense of humor. They're still the same person. But people think, oh, I shouldn't make them laugh, or I shouldn't talk about funny things or dark things because I'll upset them. And that's
It's
totally the
interesting,
wrong way to
actually.
go.
Interesting you should say that, because I mean, wasn't one of the big lessons of COVID was social isolation and how
Yeah,
it affected people. So, you know, we need human interaction. You know, that's part of who we are. So you can see how it would affect people's even recovery rates then if their immune systems are weaker and they're not getting the laughter or the social interaction, which may give them the environment to boost that immune system.
absolutely. I mean, it's a side area that I lecture in, the area, a bit of a mouthful, psychoneuroimmunology,
Mm.
or PNI for short, because otherwise your teeth get caught up and you say psychoneuroimmunology too many times. But one of the research areas in that has been looking at social functioning with cancer patients, and they've decided that an area that needs a lot more study is social interaction with cancer patients, giving them coping strategies, and educational
Mm.
strategies that actually has quite an impact on the immune system going
Yeah.
forward. And there's a lot of evidence to show that in that scientific area.
All right. You're based in a hospital in London, Gary, aren't you? Or in
Uh,
just outside
yeah, I'm
London.
not actually in London. I'm based in a hospital in Surrey, so just outside of London.
Right.
I'm actually based in I'm a full-time hypnotherapist, sort of working privately. So I've got 5 clinics and also work on with Zoom. I've got clients all around the world.
I cheated because we went straight into the
Yeah,
hypno-oncology before
yeah, that's
you,
fine.
Garry Coles.
Yeah.
But
Okay, well, tell you a little bit more about my background. But yeah, I'm a full-time hypnotherapist. I've been full-time for nearly 19 years. As well as working on Zoom with clients all around the world, I've got 5 locations that I work from. Probably the 2 most interesting ones is one is out of a doctor's surgery, an NHS doctor's surgery, although I'm there privately, and a lot of the patients are referrals from the GPs.
right.
But the interesting one is I do work a day a week in an oncology unit at a Surrey hospital, and I've been there for over 18 years now, in the hospital.
How did that come about?
It was a complete accident, which is like most things in my hypnotherapy career has been going forward. I'll give you a potted history of how I got where I am today. Going back over 20 years ago, sort of 20 something years ago, I was an IT consultant in the oil industry.
Right.
I'd studied maths and computer science, and I was an IT consultant. Um, because of the oil industry at the time, there was consolidation in the industry, and I foresaw that possibly in the future I would end up out of work or out of the oil industry. I had the foresight to insure against being made redundant, and when I was made redundant, not only did I got an insurance payout, but I got a reasonably good payoff anyway, which
Right.
meant I was in the lucky position that I didn't have to work for a couple of years. I had no idea what I wanted to do next, just that I wanted to work for myself, do
Right.
something for me. I assumed it would be back in the IT industry because that was all I knew. But because I had time, I was messing around with the internet, and it was about this time of year or slightly earlier, and I thought I'll set up a web store for Christmas and I'll sell books. So I was selling books for Christmas. Christmas came and went, and I thought, what do I sell in January? And I thought, I've got no idea. And somebody offered me a job lot of hypnotherapy CDs for weight loss, smoking, anxiety, sleep, and stuff like that. And they sold pretty well. And that sort of piqued my interest again. And like sort of most teenagers, you tend to buy books on all sorts of rubbish and then keep them forevermore. So I thought that piqued a little bit of interest on hypnosis and hypnotherapy. So I had a couple of books and I thought, oh, I'll go and have a look at those again. And I was still quite skeptical about the whole idea of
Mm.
hypnotherapy. And then I happened to see a doctor of psychology was offering an introductory course locally. And I thought, well, I'm curious, I'll go along and have a look, but I'm still very skeptical. And one of the things that he did was he said, right, I'm going to work with an issue on everybody while you're here, just to show how powerful it is. And he said to me, what issue would you like me to work with? And I said, well, I haven't really got any issues as far as I'm aware. And the one thing I thought about, which to me wasn't a major issue, was ever since I was a kid, I'd always had nightmares 3 or 4 nights a week. And I'd
Mm.
wake up sort of either shouting, punching, kicking, or something like that. And I'd just turn over and go back to sleep. So to me, it was normal. It wasn't really an issue. But I said, well, you could have a go with this. And he said, right, we'll work with that. And he told me all the techniques and all the approaches that we were going to do. And one of the things that I've since found out, I'm probably anaphantasic, which means you can't visualize.
Yeah.
So that didn't help, and I didn't realize at the time. But also, I'm not the world's best hypnotherapy subject either. And he told me all these things that were going to happen. We were going to use idiomotor responses, and I was going to visualize these certain things and all sorts of stuff. And we did a whole afternoon session. And frankly, I thought it was rubbish.
Right.
I was even more skeptical at the end of it because now I realize that I don't visualize. Then I just thought it wasn't happening. I wasn't hypnotized. And we finished the session. He said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, to be honest," I said, "I was skeptical. Now I'm even more skeptical." I said, "I just sat there with my eyes shut all afternoon out of respect for who you are and what you were doing." But I said, "I didn't see anything. I didn't feel anything. We didn't get any responses." I said, "Nothing happened." And he said, "Okay, that's fine. See how you go." And it was only, I think, about 4 or 5 weeks later, I was sitting at home, and I suddenly thought, I haven't had a nightmare since then. So I thought, now, if I was so skeptical and something's obviously happened and I don't know about it, there must be more to this than meets the eye. So I
Mhm.
thought, I'm going to do a diploma in it. I'm curious. I'm going to do a diploma in it. And then again, the intention wasn't necessarily to do it as a business or to get into it as just perhaps do a bit on the side or
Mm.
just see how it went. And I went and did a diploma, basic diploma in it, and seemed to find that I was pretty good at it. Then out of the blue, and I seem to have lots of strange coincidences. Out of the blue, I had a phone call from the hospital, and they said, "Well, somebody's just told us that you've just qualified as a hypnotherapist. We used to have one in the hospital. It was really good with the cancer patients. They said, would you like to volunteer some time to help us out?" And I was being a bit mercenary at that point because I thought, well, I've just qualified, but I'm not very experienced, and that's what I need. So I thought, well, if I go into hospital, I can see up to 8 patients a day, get the experience really, really quick, and then I'll just disappear. And I thought I'll spend a couple of weeks there, a few weeks there, get experience, and then disappear off. Now, admittedly, now I only do sort of 3 or 4 patients there a week, and I do that as a charitable basis. But I'm still there after 18 and a half years. So the idea of getting out after a couple of
Yeah,
weeks
yeah, that didn't
never
happen.
worked.
That didn't work according to plan.
No, it didn't work according to plan. But it's paid me back in lots of lovely ways. I mean, it's very lovely to be able to go and help the cancer patients and make a difference in
Mm.
people's journey. But I'm the sort of an all-in person. If I do something, I like to go all in and do it properly. For example, when I did my NLP training, it cost me a fortune, but I trained with Richard Bandler personally, and so as he invented it, I think I have a reasonable understanding of how it works.
That would be fair.
And then the same with my hypnotherapy. I decided, right, I want to do this properly. And I signed up and I became the first cohort in the UK to actually study for a master's degree in
Right.
clinical hypnotherapy through the University of West London. Uh, Now, for that part of what we had to do, that was a research project,
Mm.
and I decided to make it really difficult for myself. And I decided I wanted to do medical research. Everybody told me I was mad, and looking back on it, I probably was, because it caused me no end of ethics issues. The university panicked, first of all, when I said I wanted to work with cancer patients with hypnosis for my thesis. Um, because it was the first cohort and they had no idea about much about hypnosis and hypnotherapy anyway, so they panicked a little bit. Then I had to go through several lots of NHS ethics, which is an absolute nightmare. And then even the hospital research and development ethics was a bit of a nightmare as well. But eventually I managed to get it through them, and I just had one last hurdle, which was the teaching surgeon, and she was an absolute nightmare as well. She got in there and I thought she's just sort of giving me the attitude of, I'm a famous teaching surgeon, why are you wasting my time?
Hmm.
But looking back, I think she was just testing me that I wasn't wasting her time and I was actually going to give something
Yeah.
useful in the way of research. And that came full circle in a lovely way, because when I was about 6 to 9 months into my research, the teaching surgeon came up to me and said, "Oh, we're seeing the results of your research, and we now know which patients it's working well with, and we can see the benefits. If you'd like me to change my elective list around to accommodate you, let me know." And I
Action
thought,
speaks louder than words, and
yeah,
things
so I
like
thought
that.
if I've
Yeah.
now got the teaching surgeon moving their operation schedule around just to accommodate the hypnotherapist, they're obviously noticing
Yeah, yeah. I
differences.
think that qualifies as success.
Yeah,
What
but
are
yeah,
the benefits that you see to cancer patients?
well, there's a number of things, but finishing off that, the research that I
Sorry,
actually ended
pardon
up
me.
doing, and sort of finishing off where I've got where I am today, the research I actually ended up doing was I did a research into pre-surgical hypnosis and the effects that it had on the recovery quality in breast cancer operations, and
Okay.
I was able to demonstrate that it did. both psychologically and physically. I was able to demonstrate that it did, and how and why, and the approaches to use. So that sort of started to get me known a little bit, sort of in the industry. I was then asked to do some research for another hypnotherapist in the States, who then took me under her wing and sort of did some training with me, which was pretty good. Then I had a knock-on effect that I got invited to go to a party in Harley Street in London. At the party, I was accompanied by this sort of quite a famous hypnotherapist, and we met one of the TV doctors, and the TV doctor was training in hypnotherapy and was asking this other hypnotherapist whether she could do some work on a couple of clients for him. And she lives mainly in the States now anyway. And she said, "Oh no, I'm rather busy. Gary's brilliant. He'll sort them out for you." So I worked with his clients. That obviously went well because he became one of my clients, which is why I can't say which TV doctor it is.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
ended up joining his practice in Harley Street. He's now gone, so I look after it with somebody else, but I'm now just there on my own.
Mm.
So that sort of happened. And then on the hospital side, that's become full circle, because I started after my research sort of got out, I started getting emails from people saying, "Oh, you're a bit of an expert on this. Can you give me some advice?" And then I did a couple of podcast interviews and was getting more emails. And then I
Right.
was invited to a UK conference and got even more, and people saying, "Oh, you need to put a training course together on this topic." And at that stage, I didn't think it would be of interest to people, but I was
Mm.
obviously wrong, because we go on a few more years, and I now go around the world speaking at conferences, obviously like yours in Dublin. This year I've been to Canada and the States. I've taught doctors in Belgium. I've done psychologists in Bahrain.
Yeah.
I've got a script book out for hypnotherapists as well, for hypno-oncology. And do training courses for them, and I'm now currently trying to finish. I've got 3 more chapters. I'm trying to do an academic book on the subject for doctors and hypnotherapists as well.
That would be really interesting.
But
I'm
that's
going to
sort of,
come back to you on that in a minute,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I'm fascinated with the medical link actually. I mean, I think it was in Netflix. There was and it was a Belgian film, that they had where they did all the pre-surgical hypnosis, and they were just part of the team. You know, and I know in the book Beyond Pills and Potions, it's already been evidenced of the effects that pre-surgical hypnosis has on recovery time, the amount of time people spend in hospital, the ease at which operations take place because there's less blood spilling and all that kind of
Mm.
stuff. So what do you define as the benefits, or in what areas does it help? Is it in stress, anxiety about operations? Is it in recovery? Is it or is it across the board? Is that where
It's
hypnotherapy?
across the board. I mean, what was interesting, one of the surgeons that was involved in my research was very, very much on side, because he'd actually, as a student surgeon, he'd actually experienced an operation that was done totally under hypnosis instead of anesthetic.
Right.
So he was totally on side because he could see how powerful it was. What I was looking at, particularly for the research, was mainly from the psychological point of view,
Mm-hmm.
but also some of the physical point of view. And the things that I found, we found that generally, on the day of a breast cancer operation, people were depressive, borderline depressive, or definitely depressive, which is not a major surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did pre-surgical hypnosis, which was looking into recovery and being complicit during the operation, having a good recovery quality and so on and so forth. And we measured a lot of psychological parameters in people. And then we followed it up a week later, and that was before they got biopsy results, because I didn't want things going all over the place. So we wanted to try and keep things as narrow as possible. But what we did find out was the control group that we had was still borderline depressive, and
Right.
so on. All the markers had gone further down on the control group, but the hypnosis group were essentially back to what we would call population norm. So normal in the way of thinking. So no depression, back to normal. The only area was social functions were different, and that I have reasons why I believe that's the case.
And you've spoke about that
Yeah,
at the start, actually.
yeah, yes, yeah. We're mentioning things like that. So people have this funny idea that as soon as somebody has got been diagnosed with cancer, a lot of friends and family members sort of cut themselves off, or they
Yeah.
don't know how to talk to them or what to talk about, because they don't want to upset them, and that causes a bit of a problem. with
Absolutely.
social functioning. So that was still a problem. But we found that psychologically, the hypnosis group were back to normal.
And that was before they got their results.
Before they got the results.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's a key part to that. Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted it before the results because obviously, depending on what the diagnosis and
Yeah,
prognosis
of
was,
course.
they would go all over the place.
Yeah.
So just looking purely for the surgical point of view
Yeah.
at that side. But the other interesting thing that we found was that we looked at some physical attributes, and we found that the hypnosis group seemed to be getting a fast recovery quality. And the most interesting thing was that they felt that, or they perceived that they were feeling less pain than the
Right.
control group. And then when we looked further down, we found that not only were they perceiving they were feeling less pain, they were actually taking less medication for pain than the
Right.
other group. So that was quite interesting as well.
An interesting question. How did you choose, or how were the control group and the hypnosis group chosen?
Pretty randomly by nurse practitioners. It was just basically draw out of a hat.
So they really didn't even know they were in a study, if you like, the
Oh
control.
no. The ethics was so over the top that no, they had to actually get somebody, and I'd have liked them to have not known because we could have got lots and lots more people. But the problem we had was that we weren't allowed to coerce people into doing it. All as we could do is I or somebody else could give them a leaflet about the research,
Right.
and if they were interested, they then had to contact me. Where you can imagine how many people that are just going to have a breast cancer operation are going to be interested in some muppet that wants them to do questionnaires and things. So that didn't help things. But again, we could give them a leaflet, and then we had to sort of follow up, and then they had to have a consent form, and then they had to have another consent form on the day, and so on. At any time they could drop out. So they made it as difficult as they possibly could for
So
me.
how did the control group not know that they weren't receiving hypnosis?
Because they had nothing,
Okay. So
just
they
the
knew
questionnaire.
they weren't receiving it.
Yes, which did cause a bit of a problem
Yeah,
because one of the problems we had was people dropping out. Because the people from the control, when they found out they were in the control group, we had people saying, "Well, I'm not doing it because there's
no,
nothing in
yeah,
it for
yeah.
me," which was
No.
a bit of a
There's
shame.
no sugar pill that you're going to hand them in its place.
No,
Mm.
but because again, and it's an interesting thing with research. We know that hypnosis is something. We know something
Mhm.
happens, and we have hypnosis. But a big element of we could argue with hypnosis or hypnotherapy may be the placebo effect.
Yes, of course.
Now, if you're giving somebody, I've seen other researches where somebody has had hypnosis and the control group might have had counselling or they might have had some relaxation or something else. Well, if they are still thinking it might be hypnosis, or if they're giving something, how much is that going to give an element of placebo effect,
Yes.
which is going to cross over with hypnosis? So it's very difficult to say, well, what are you going to give them instead?
Yeah.
So in my case, it was nothing whatsoever because then we had that real
Yeah.
pure differential
Yeah.
between
But
the
obviously they
hypnosis
knew that they
function.
weren't getting anything.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
knew that. So yeah. So
Mm.
um how common is it to have pre-surgical operations in the UK or hypnosis?
Still pretty rare as far as I know,
Right.
but certainly more and more hospitals are now sort of coming round to the idea.
Right.
But even where we are, it's absolutely crazy because it doesn't get followed up so much
Right.
because I did my research. We had the chief surgeon move their elective list around to accommodate me because they could see the results.
Yeah.
Now I had a patient last week who was actually a radiologist.
Right.
In the hospital where I work. She's a
Yeah.
radiologist in the cancer unit who has breast cancer. So I was doing some work with her. Now she's already had surgery and everything else, and I was just talking to her about my research, and she said, "Oh, I hadn't heard about that. Well, I could have really done with something like that when I was going through my operation." And I'm thinking that's in the hospital where I did it, and I
Right.
still am. And the word's still not obviously not getting round as much as it.
There is yeah, I think that's kind of a piece of work that one, it's one of the questions that comes up as we go through these series of interviews is, and the aim of the conference as well, part of it is to, demystify hypnosis and hypnotherapy and make it a more go-to therapy.
Yeah.
Now, it is so vast because you're working with the mind, and the mind, of course, affects every part of everyone's life. And then you can specialize down into the various component parts that you do, but trying to get that as a more everyday occurrence, because the evidence does seem to be there, both from your own research and from other stuff that I've seen, that shows that it does work. But obviously it's not followed through. These are once-off studies that just don't go that much further than we'd like them to go.
No, the problem for that is the funding. It costs a lot of money to do serious research. Okay, you can do case histories and things, but to do serious research, and particularly sort of the area that I was working in, you're working with cancer patients, you've got to have indemnity insurance, go through ethics boards, and all that costs time and money. So unless you've got something like a university behind you, it's very, very difficult for an individual to do. And whereas pharmacology's got lots of money that they'll throw at their latest drug, so that's where all the research is, and it's not in our area. But I think there's a couple of sort of areas or things that we need to look at. You say about demystifying, and that is very true. I think we still need to demystify it with the public.
Yes.
There's still this perception about stage hypnosis and being under control and all sorts of things like that. But I think as far as the clinical and medical fraternity are concerned, we're still not taken particularly seriously. And I think one of the reasons we're not taken particularly seriously is okay, the industry isn't regulated, which in some ways doesn't help. I've got a master's degree in it, so that gives me some credibility when I'm talking to doctors and medical staff. But other than that, because the majority of people have just got a piece of paper from a training school, they tend to be looked down upon by the medical fraternity, particularly as a lot of courses are quite short, relatively. So that doesn't help sort of the perception from a medical point of view. But worse than that, unfortunately, I see so many things on social media for outlandish claims from people that just aren't credible. It irritates me when I see people, not in the UK, because it would be illegal to do so in the UK, but people in the US, for example, claiming that they can cure cancer with hypnosis. And there are people that specialize, allegedly. You don't need to take chemotherapy. You can have 4 sessions of hypnotherapy a week for 3 months at silly amounts of money, and we'll see what happens. But there's no guarantees, and so that sort of irritates me. And and I see sort of even other areas. A good example that I've seen is that I outside of the cancer arena, one area I do a lot of work with is borderline personality disorder. And I came across that because I had a patient approach me and said, would you work with me? I was a little bit nervous about working with it, so approached her GP and said, look, your patient, your borderline personality patient wants to work with me. Would you would you consent to that? And the doctor was very dismissive, saying, yeah, you're not likely to cause any harm. So anyway, I worked with this borderline personality disorder patient, and she wrote me a lovely letter to say how I transformed her life from existing to living, and she'd got a job, she'd been on holiday, she'd been out for meals, and she passed that back on to her GP, who begrudgingly admitted that I'd made more difference in half a dozen sessions than anything they'd done in 15 years, and now regularly sends me a borderline personality disorder patient.
So it's that individual evidence then, even if it's not a collective evidence through research, it's individual evidence, particularly with the relevant people who can refer, like doctors in this case.
Yeah. But where we don't help ourselves as an industry, coming back to that, I saw a post on a social media forum, a hypnotherapy forum, saying, "Oh, can somebody give me some advice with borderline personality disorder? Because I've got a patient to work with." And I gave some advice, the approach that I would use to work with them. And somebody else popped up on social media and said, "Oh, I cure these in 1 session." And so I went to the person. I said, "Well, first of all, as hypnotherapists, we don't cure anything. We assist, we facilitate, and so on." But I said, I'm very curious. What is your approach, and what is your evidence base for curing? And the guy came back quite dismissively saying, "Oh, I see you're a clinical and medical hypnotherapist. I'm a curative hypnotherapist, whatever one of those is." He said, "So I cure things." And he said, anyway, borderline personality disorder, he said, it's caused by a genetic switch in the wrong place. So he said, so all I simply do is I hypnotize somebody, I talk to the unconscious, I get the genetic switch switched into the right place, so they're cured. And I said, okay, that sounds fantastic. But I said, so what is your evidence base to show that it's worked? And he said, well, at the end of the session, the patient tells me they feel better.
Yeah, well,
And I
we've all
think,
had
well,
that.
if we're coming up with unsubstantiated claims like that,
I
no
understand.
wonder the medical industry doesn't take us seriously.
I do, and I understand, and there is a great book, and I think it may even be in Pills and Potions as well, but the expectation effect, which it deals a lot with placebo, and
Mm.
I think in the medical sense they call these miracles because they do happen, but they
They
are
do happen.
researched.
Oh yeah,
They
absolutely,
are
they do happen.
researched,
Yeah,
which means, and they can happen to any of us as we go about our business. But yeah, I mean, it is hard to. For particularly for medical and hospitals and stuff, it does have to be researched. It does have to be evidenced.
yeah, yeah. It
And they
does,
have to be able to genuinely believe it.
yeah, and again, there have been instances of cancer patients, spontaneous remission and so
Yes,
on, and there has been claims of hypnotherapy involved and things like that. But unless they're actually on nothing but hypnotherapy, how are you going to substantiate it?
absolutely.
And even then, you can't prove that it was the hypnotherapy,
Yeah,
because you do get
absolutely.
spontaneous remissions. So,
Yeah. Well,
and generally, you're not going to find a patient that is not on any other sort of intervention apart from hypnotherapy for something like cancer. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
it's going to make it very, very difficult to get any sort of evidence base there at all.
I think I saw Irving Kirsch in London last year in 2022,
Mm.
and he had done the research on the depression drugs in the States, which 20 years later, his evidence that it was 80% placebo was proven.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
I
mean, but
attended.
it took 20
Yeah,
years to go through that
yeah,
whole process.
yeah. No, I
Um,
attended the talk and looked at his research, and it was very, very interesting.
yeah,
But,
absolutely.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
really, really
it shows how
interesting.
much the placebo effect is there.
Yeah, and that book Expectation Effect deals with that in you. It's well worth. I can't remember who wrote it now, but it's well worth. I'll send it on to you anyway. Um, so the kind of clients that you're dealing with, Gary, I mean, are you getting? Is it what type of stuff are they're coming with? Are you? I think you mentioned to me earlier about client curveballs that you get a few.
Mm.
Do you get that much, or is it just people coming in mainly going, "Oh, I'm about to go for an operation, or I've just had an operation"?
Yeah, within in hospital, I work with people for the entire cancer journey.
Right.
So I would start off where seeing people who've just been diagnosed. So there's the psychological fallout from the diagnosis. There's fear, panic,
Yeah.
anxiety, worry, all that sort of stuff. Then we would perhaps move on to fears and phobias. Somebody might be frightened of going into a scanner or frightened of needles. Then we do the pre and post surgical work.
Right.
Is the next thing. Probably the biggest area I tend to work with in hospital is actually side effects of treatment.
Right.
Um, Things, obviously, pain control is one of those, but a lot of areas I work with will be things like sort of anticipatory nausea or dizziness or eating problems, neuropathy, taste and smell changes, all that dyschezia that's known as. So I work with that type of thing. Then we work on pain control. Um, and then we would look at sort of going perhaps on for palliative care. I
Right.
don't do a huge amount of that because being a hospital, if they get sort of beyond or deep into the palliative side of it, they tend to go to a hospice, which obviously is outside of the hospital, and I'm just in the hospital-based stuff. So I do less palliative care
Okay.
than you can do. And then sometimes you're working with post cancer. There are things like, how are they going to take into account the life change as it's made
Mhm.
to them? What's life going to be like going forward? And it might open other things that they want to change things in their life that have been impacting them that cancer's been a wake up call for.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
so pretty much the entire
So
journey.
it is. So that's a vast array of symptoms, if you like, or
Mm, absolutely.
that you're covering, and reasons for being there. You mentioned some unusual clients that you would have from time to time. Um, do you want to tell one or
Yeah.
two little stories?
Yeah, we were talking about sort of thinking outside the box sometimes, and you do get some amusing stories in the hospital. And I said the phrase I always hate to hear in hospital is the phrase, "Oh, we booked a patient in for you. The counsellors think it will be a good idea." That normally means that a patient's had weeks or months of counselling and have got absolutely nowhere, and uh, and they think, "Oh, we'll bung them onto the hypnotherapist." We haven't been able to do anything. And quite often I'm wondering what they do in their counselling sessions, because I'll talk to a patient for sort of the first session, and I'll go back to the counsellors or for reflective studies and things. So, oh, you didn't tell me about this and this about this patient, and they was like, oh, I didn't know that, and I didn't know that. I mean, I had one recently, and it was sort of depressive and anxiety and various things, and I can't remember where we got into it, but I said she said something very negative about herself, and I said, well, what would your friends say about you? I said, well, if I asked that question to one of your friends, what would they say about you? And she said, I don't have any friends. And I said, well, none at all. She said, well, no, I only one, but she said, I'm not allowed to see her anymore because there's an injunction against me when her house burnt down, but it's nothing to do with anything I did. And I sort of fed that back to the counsellors, and they had no idea about any of that. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
and this lady sort of also said that she wouldn't go out by herself. She needed her boyfriend with her. And I said, oh, why is that? Do you get frightened about things? She said, oh, yes, I'm frightened what I might do to people. I want to harm them and things. And the counsellors had not found any of this out.
Wow.
So that was quite amusing. But one of the ones I was thinking was just sort of thinking outside the box. One of the same stories I had was I had a counsellor phone me up and said, oh, you're the hypnotherapist, you deal with fears and phobias, don't you? And I thought, yeah, finally they understand what we do. And she said, I've got a lady with a severe sleep phobia. She said she's frightened to go to bed, so we have to sedate her to get her into bed at night. Can you work with her? I said, yes, I'd work with her. And the upshot was, which I didn't know at the time, the reasons behind it was she was a very religious Eastern European lady. She'd had a cancer operation. She'd reacted to the anesthetic, which gave her hallucinations. Now, the main hallucination she had was seeing herself dead in the hospital bed. And so that freaked her. And she thought that if she went to sleep, that was what was going to happen. It was a premonition that she was going to die in her bed. So she was fighting it. She wouldn't get into bed unless she was sedated and so on. So they said, would I work with her? And I didn't. They brought her down to me. She's walking around my office. And I'm thinking, this is a bit strange. What's going on? And they said to me, oh, no, her fear has changed. It's got a lot worse. They said she's now frightened to sit down, relax, or close her eyes. And I'm thinking, do you really know how we work? I said, so you brought me a hypnotherapy client who won't sit down, relax, or close their eyes. And I thought, okay, how am I going to work with this? And in the end, it was quite simple. And I think sometimes the simplest things, if you just analyze and think outside the box and in a very simple way, it works well. But I said to this lady, I said, not closing your eyes. I said, it must be really, really painful for you. How do you cope? And she said, what's painful? I said, well, never blinking. I said, you can't possibly blink if it hurt, if it's frightened you to close your eyes. And she said, oh, no, blinking's fine. And I said, so that doesn't frighten you? And she said, oh, no, I can blink that because that's perfectly normal. And so I said to her, I said, well, can we time how often you blink in a minute? And we timed her. And I said, well, if you blink twice more in a minute, would that be any more frightening? And she said, oh, no. And I got to the stage about, well, every time I click my fingers, I want you to blink. And we did that. So we built it up so she was blinking twice as much as she normally was. And then we got onto this topic about, well, how long do you blink for? And was that frightening? And then I got her to double the length of her blinking. And eventually, by sort of increasing the length of the blink and doing more blinks per minute, we actually got eventually to full eye closure without any hint of sort of fear and panic whatsoever.
That's
But it was
definitely thinking outside the box.
just thinking outside the box and reframing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I call it thinking outside the box now. I used to say sort of you need to go off piste, but it was I used to phrase it. But I did that when I was teaching in Bahrain, and they all looked at me really blankly.
And you now teach all over the world, don't you? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I know I've seen you in both Vegas and in London, and soon to be Dublin, but you're elsewhere as well.
Yeah. This year I've been in the States 4 times. I've done a couple in the UK. I've done one in Canada. There's talk about me doing Australia and New Zealand and teaching. Yeah, I'll go where anybody wants me. I've taught doctors in Belgium. I've taught psychologists in Bahrain, and so people all over the place. And Zoom sessions. I've done 2 big courses to Australia and New Zealand via Zoom. But I'd love to get out there in person.
And was it the research that kind of led down that path? That is in, what you were talking about earlier about the research that you carried out, the fact that you're in the hospital led for people to say, oh, I want to know about, so therefore I'm going to make contact with Garry, and that.
Yeah, it did sort of go full circle. I mean, word got out about my research, Then I decided to put a course together because I must admit I didn't realize quite how much knowledge I did have, because again, being in the hospital for over 18 years, I've worked with several thousand cancer patients, so I know what works and what doesn't work. I've developed
Yeah.
approaches and techniques. The hospital sends me on cancer courses regularly, so I keep updated on that. So
Yeah.
I didn't quite realize how much knowledge I did actually have. And obviously I had to do a lot for my research for my masters, so that expanded it further. And then it became clear when I was getting all these emails and things that, yeah, perhaps I was quite one of the experts. And then people started saying to me, "You realize you're probably the top 2 or 3 in the UK." And now it's sort of, since I've started teaching all around the world and presenting around the world, people are now saying, "You realize you're probably in the top 2 or 3 in the world on this particular topic," which is a bit of a strange idea. Um, but it does seem to be that, because I can pretty much guarantee now that on social media, particularly, if there's ever a question asked about hypnotherapy and cancer is mentioned, somebody will always stick my name up and say, "This is the guy you've got to talk to."
Yeah.
So it
And
has
as
seemed.
someone who has started your course, not finished it by any means, but started it,
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
good,
It's
good.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And is there much demand for it, Gary? Obviously, there is if you put it together, but
Yeah.
did that demand surprise you? I mean, in hindsight, when you talk about 1 in 2 being affected, it shouldn't, but did it?
Yeah, and nowadays I think that more and more people should be doing the course, because if you're looking at the statistic that 1 in 2,
Yeah,
you look at somewhere that the population of the US, for example,
yeah, it's
you know,
150 million people,
yeah, so
give or
that's.
take.
Yeah, and another interesting statistic, actually, out of that, you think one in 2 people gets cancer, or is going to be involved with cancer. So if you look at 150 million people, you're looking at 70 odd million, 75 million that are going to be affected by it.
Mm.
And one of the other pieces of research that I actually found is that 40% of cancer sufferers will actually seek out complementary therapies.
All right.
So if you're then so you've got 70 million or 75 million, you're looking at 40% of that.
Well, in fact, you got 300 million, which is 150 million. So
Right.
you're looking
Okay.
at
Yeah.
40%. It only gets bigger. I mean, you have 60 million in the UK, I think, give or take a few.
Yeah.
So
So
you're
if you're
still
looking at so if you're looking at 30 million,
12 million
that you
people.
get, yeah. So it's a lot of people that are going to be looking for complementary
So it's
therapies.
a potential area of growth if it's managed properly
Yeah.
and maybe evidenced or at least handled right in terms of public perception and medical perception.
Yeah, yeah,
Going back
absolutely.
to what you
So,
said.
no, the use. Well, certainly when I started, I was absolutely surprised about the amount of people that were interested and sort of jumped on the courses and whatever. I think because of the world economy at the moment, it's slowing a little bit. I was certainly talking to people that teaching other hypnotherapy areas. There's certainly still a lot of demand for being taught to be a hypnotherapist.
Mm-hmm.
But hypnotherapists themselves seem to be taking less sort of specialist training at the
Right.
moment. So I
Okay.
think that's probably due to the economy.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully they will sort of get back to it. And I think I really think this is such a big area. Everybody talks about how
Absolutely.
many people are depressed or anxious, you need or obese, and you need to jump on that. But 1 in 2, this is to me is far the
Yeah,
biggest
no,
area that you
that's
should stay
very,
involved with.
very significant numbers.
Yeah,
And the other thing, of course, is, as I go through these, there'll be a lot of talk about business, and that's very important. Of course it is, because everybody is their own business,
yeah,
but everybody also needs their own skills. And if there is new areas of focus that can potentially, help people, not from both a business perspective, but also in their own personal life. I think you said to me that you have a lot of hypnotherapists coming up to you going, my so-and-so, my relation has cancer. What do I do?
yeah. And that was another spur really for putting the training together. Is
Mm,
people coming up to saying, "Well, I'm a qualified hypnotherapist. I've been a therapist for however many years, and so and so close to me has got cancer. What do I do?" And I'm thinking, well, they're already experienced hypnotherapists and so on, and and yet they just sort of fall apart. They don't know what to do.
yeah.
So that was another reason for putting the training together, to give them ideas of what they can do, all the areas they can help with, and the techniques that I utilise to do it, and the approaches that I utilise to do it. But also a background in understanding cancer, how it forms, and all the treatments behind it. And that is very important, in my opinion, because if you're going to work in a hospital, particularly, a patient will see you as another expert in their chain of people they're seeing, and they'll rush into you saying, "Oh, I've got breast cancer, grade 2, stage 3." And so on. And if you suddenly look at them blankly, you've lost credibility straight away, and
Yeah,
therefore they
absolutely.
think you don't know what you're doing. So you do need a background in understanding their journey, and also that helps you then with the medical people, because if you're speaking the same language as them, you can communicate better. And frankly, that some of them are absolutely rubbish at communicating with the patients anyway. So it's useful to be in with them to guide them to actually talk
Yeah,
properly,
yeah,
because it's a
absolutely.
great thing going back to when we mentioned psychoneuroimmunology. One of the big things there, again, affecting the patient, is I always say a really important thing is look at the diagnosis, not the prognosis, because
Yes.
the diagnosis is fact based on research that we've done, samples, and so on. Prognosis is just things based on statistics and hearsay. And if the patient gets too sort of geared up to the prognosis, if if somebody, and thankfully now they tend to give percentages rather than anything else, but if the doctor or the oncologist says to the patient, "Oh yeah, it's beyond such and such now, there's nothing we can do, you've probably got 2 years," then they're going to die within 2 years because they've been
Yeah.
psychologically programmed to do that.
Yeah. What does it Steve Berman calls those curses? I think
Yeah,
that's what we
yeah.
call them.
Yeah, so I always say, yeah, look at the diagnosis, not the prognosis.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
you say now that, even if you say you've got an 80%, 80%, well, they do it the other way now. They say, well, 20% will live beyond 5 years.
Yeah, and that was one of his other points as well, is to use
Yeah,
that
yeah. So
term,
you look at the positive. So,
look at
so,
the positive.
so
Well, you
you're,
still stay at the
yeah,
negative, but you're
yeah,
focused on the positive.
yeah. So you're one of the 20% that's going to go beyond 5 years. Let's work for that.
Yeah, yeah,
Rather, and the diagnosis is this. This is what you're going to aim for.
yeah, absolutely.
Forget the prognosis. It's the
It's
prognosis is not real. It doesn't exist. It's just made up.
no, it's a guessing game at that point in time.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other thing, you have placebo, but you also have nocebo. So, you
Mm,
know, it feeds into that.
absolutely.
Gary, what, last question.
Mm.
What does hypnosis mean to you?
That's a difficult one, isn't it? And I mean, obviously because I'm a bit of an anorak, I did the masters, so on. So I've looked at the where they've done scans on people under
Mm,
hypnosis. So we do see there is stuff happening there. Obviously, there's still lots of arguments that about what it is and what it isn't, and even arguments of now whether it's just a ritual and
yeah,
whether we actually
absolutely.
need inductions and so on.
Yeah,
I think the idea I've now gone down the road that I simplify everything with patients, because patients at the end of the day, patients, clients, whatever you want to call them, they're interested in the outcome. They're not interested on how you get there.
yeah,
Okay, there is still an element of expectation of what they're expecting hypnosis to be. I mean, I still do relaxation as part of my hypnosis sessions, although we know that relaxation is not required
yeah,
whatsoever. And I tell them it's not required. I just tell them that I'm giving them relaxation because it's pleasant as part of what we're doing. And and now I must admit, and it's a phrase I pinched. It's not one that I made up, but Gary Turner, who you probably know, the thing I always say to clients that hypnosis means to me is imagining things differently.
there you go. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah, that's
And
it.
that's what I say to my clients. You come here because you've got a problem. We're going to get you to imagine differently about that problem so that it doesn't exist, because it's you that's created it. We get you to imagine it some stuff differently, then the problem's not there.
That is a really, really lovely description.
Yeah, and even the sessions now, I used to say go in about all the sessions, and even now I say, right, what we're going to do for the hypnosis session is you're going to shut your eyes. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to tell you when to open them, and stuff happens in between. That's it.
But you're going to get the result you want when you leave.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Gary, thank you. It's been a lovely conversation.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to seeing you in Dublin in April.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to
And
being out there.
it's going to be great because, I mean, it's the second year of the conference. It's getting bigger. And, this field is such a fascinating field, but it's also relevant, not just as in statistical terms, but
Yeah.
to individuals, because there'll be loads of people there who will know or have been affected um, by cancer in
Yeah, as you
childhood or
say,
family.
being 1 in 2,
Yeah,
basically that's probably
absolutely.
every person is going to
Yeah,
have know
absolutely.
somebody or that's either had it or going through it at the moment.
So for anyone who's watching this, Go see Garry. It's a very interesting and a very informative presentation. Wherever you are and whatever time of the day it is that you're watching this, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Garry for joining us here today. And we'll see you all in Dublin in April. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.